Hello, in this tutorial we would look at how to write conditional statements in C# for Unity 3D. Let's go ahead and launch a new instance of Unity and create a new project which we would call Conditional Statements C# Scripting, and create your project. So a conditional statement is a statement that could be executed based on a condition, which is known as conditional statement. The statement is often a block of code, and it could have two main types. First type is called conditional branching, which is the one that we're going to focus on in this tutorial, and the second one is called conditional looping, which is a topic that we will be covering later. In conditional branching, the statement allows you to branch your code depending on whether or not a certain condition is met. So this allows us to make a certain type of decisions. And in conditional branching, we have two main components. One is a part of code called an if statement, which allows us to make or declare a certain decision. And the second part is called switch statement. So let's look at our Unity environment. And let's make sure that our layout is the default layout, which would allow us to work with console environment here. If this is not the environment that you're seeing here, you can go up to layout and make sure that you have your default environment set up. Second thing we're going to do, we're going to go to our assets folder, and I'm going to create a new folder called scripts. And inside scripts, I'm going to create a new instance of C# script, and let's call this if statement. Let's double click on this C# script and open our mono develop environment. And let's start to talk about what concept of an if statement is. To understand the structure of if statements, we're going to create a very basic number checking game. What we're going to use here is a global variable that we declare above our void start, and that's going to be an integer type, and we're going to call this number. And again, we can call this anything. And I'm going to enter number 5 as the input of this variable. Now, the structure that we want to create with our if statement structure is a structure that would allow us to set up a certain number of conditions for the type of numbers that we could be entering. For instance, if my number is positive, meaning it's greater than 0, it would send a prompt to the console that I'm working with a positive number. If the number is less than 0, it's going to send a prompt to the console that we're working with a negative number. So let's set up that structure in our void start. So I'm giving myself some space here to work with. So structure of an if statement starts with typing if. And if is ultimately the trigger for the program to know that now we're entering this branching conditional statement. And anytime that you're writing an if statement, you use parentheses to input your condition. For instance, a condition here would be checking whether our number is greater or less than 0. Then once you declare that statement inside curly brackets, you declare what you want to do with this information. So again, inside parentheses, you declare a condition, and inside your curly bracket, you tell it what to do. So for instance, in our parentheses, I'm going to say check to see if number is less than 0. So if this condition is met, then we're going to print something to our console. So we're going to use debug.log, open close parentheses, and apologies, semicolon, and here we're going to print something. For instance, we could say that, well, if number is less than 0, this is a negative number. So this is the condition that is going to be checked. So let's run our code and see what happens if we are inputting a negative number here. So I'm going to go to my integer and I'm going to put a negative sign in front of it. Let's save this code, go to our Unity, and let's go to our hierarchy and attach our script to one of the objects. It really doesn't matter which one. Let's connect it to camera. So I'm just going to drag the script over main camera. Now when you look at it in Inspector, that script is going to be connected. Now let's go to our console and go to our game scene, and now that information is printed. So number was less than 0, therefore we see negative number. Let's go back to our script and let's look at what we have. So we declare what our input is. Here we have a condition. If that is met, then this information is printed. But what if this number now is positive? Let's see what information we'll get here. I saved, going back here, my clear console, and let's go to game mode again. And now we don't have anything here because we have not really specified what that other condition would be. All right, so that's what we're going to do next. So if your condition is met, this is what we'll see. If not, then there's no other instructions here for the code to do. So that's how you could start to create a secondary condition that would complement your initial if statement. Perhaps you've heard of else statements. So if and else statements often are coupled together to set up an initial condition, and if that's not met, else do something else. To set up an else condition, you enter the command, and after that, because unlike if statement where we have parentheses where we place our condition, in else statement we are interested in if not. So the condition, if it's not met here, then do something else. So therefore we skip the parentheses here and we just use a curly bracket to tell it what to do. I'm gonna enter here to so we organize it this way. So in this case, if that condition is met, do this, else do something else. In this case, we could just reprint this our debug log, but in this case I'm going to say else. In this case it would be a positive number. So let's save, go to Unity, and let's play again. Now we see that it's a positive number. Right. So this way we have a way of inputting a number and knowing whether it's a positive number or a negative number. So this statement allows you to set up conditions, but what if you want to have more than these two states? For instance, what if you want to identify whether your number is, in this case, maybe greater than 0, right? So in this case, it would be just positive, but you want to have a little bit more information about this. Maybe you want to separate between inputting a single-digit number versus a double-digit number. So in order for us to do that, we need to have an in-between statement where actually the name is else if. So if you enter else if, in this case, we need to actually specify what that in-between statement is. So you would need parentheses, then you would need a curly bracket. So the structure is similar to an if statement. It's just we need to identify that this is between our if and else. Because if statement would be executed first. If the condition is not met, then it would be passed down to the next one, to the next one. Great. In this case, the statement that we want to set up is whether our number is greater than 0, and maybe, in this case, if you want to focus on single digit, is less than 10. So we would set up our condition by saying our number, in this case, should be greater than 0. But we have also another statement at the end. So in this case, it's going to be greater than 0, but less than 10. So to create that other condition, we're going to use an AND condition. And we could use the AND sign, but you have to use it twice. So our number is greater than 0, but our number has to be less than 10. In this case, because I want to only focus on single digits, I could say that my number is less than 10, or my number is less than or equal to 9. So I want to use this state so then we are familiar with this type of condition as well. So if our number is greater than 0, not equal to 0, greater than 0, because 0 is nor positive nor negative, but our number is less or equal to 9, then we can debug another statement. So we can say debug.log. Here we could print that in this case these are positive single digits. Right? You could write anything here. Great. So we have negative state, we have greater than 0, less than 9. Here we could also set up another condition, but actually this else condition covers everything else. So instead of maybe calling it positive numbers, we could say positive double digits. Or actually it could be greater than 100, so we could say multiple digits. Great, so let's save. And let's input here a number that's greater than perhaps 9, like 12. And let's check. I'm going to clear and play. Positive multiple digits. Let's check for number 9. We want to make sure that this equal statement works. Save and play. Great, positive single digits. And let's go back to our code. So we're covering less than 0. We're just covering between 0 and 9. We're covering everything else. But what about number 0? What happens if we input number 0? Let's save and let's go to our console and play. Actually, right now, it's using the input for else statement. So it says positive multi-digits. Let's see what that happens. Because we're covering less than 0, we're covering greater than 0, and less than 10. And we're saying everything else. So this everything else could be greater than 9, or it could actually be 0, right? Because we don't actually have a statement for 0. So this is where we could set up another else if statement if you want to be specific and just say that if it's 0, then specify something else. So you can have as many else if statements as you want, but you can only have one if statement and one else statement in a setup like this. So we're going to say else if, in this case, if number is equal, but here similar to the and sign, we have to use equal 0, and then we would provide a debug message here, and we could just say that we are writing that it is, let's do lowercase 0, save, and we still have 0, we're checking for that. Let's replay this, and our input is 0. Now we will be using the same if statement writing logic to control a 3D game object using our keyboard keys. First, let's come out of our game scene and go to project and create a new C# script. And this time, let's call it if statement input key. You want to make sure that you're not using any symbols for name of your files, because the name that you're allocating to your script is going to be ultimately used as name of our class. So you could see that indicated here. So if you're using any symbols, that might cause issues along the way. Great, so let's create a new game object. Let's go to game object under 3D object. First, let's create a plane, and in our inspector, let's change scale of our X to 5 and Z to 5. So this way we're working with the larger territory. I also want to create a second game object, which we're going to use to then connect to this script that we just created. So go to game object, 3D object, and create a capsule. And while your arrows are activated, you could drag it up. And remember, using WER, you can start to scale your game objects. So for now, just using move object, just elevate it slightly above your plane. And you want to select your camera and make sure that you could see your capsule in front of your camera. In this case, this completely works. The last thing, I want to take my new script, which we call it if statement input key, and connect it to the capsule game object. So just drag it over and connect. And you want to click on capsule and make sure that your C# script is linked here. Great. Now let's go back to our script. You can double click on it to open it in MonoDevelop. We can keep our old script here open and reference back to it if needed. And this is a default script which we can use to then construct our new logic. If we look at our first if statement, we were compiling all the steps inside void setup. So in this case, all we were interested in doing was to print the message once, and therefore structure of the void start would allow us to do that. In a sense, this is the method that's running first, and if there's a condition met, it's going to return in the capsule. But what we want to do now, which is changing color of a 3D game object using keys, is something that has to run while the game is running. So therefore, instead of placing our if statement inside void start, we're going to actually place it inside void update. So this way I can access this if statement anywhere in the game. Often when you're starting a process like this, in the sense you have an idea of what you want to create, but maybe you're not familiar with the exact syntax that you're going to be using, it's a good idea to write instructions for yourself in a way that then we can break down the overall algorithm into a series of parts that we can execute step by step. In this case, we're going to write it as a comment for ourselves before we look for the specific syntax and think about how different parts interact with one another. So what I know is that I want to write an if structure here, and I'm going to use parentheses to create a condition and then tell it what to do. Inside parentheses here, we're going to know that condition in this case would be if a certain key is pressed. So I'm going to say key pressed, and I can think about what this key could be. Maybe if I want to change color of my object to color red, I could use the R key. So I could say R key pressed equals R. And there's obviously different ways you can write this, because this is not something that will be executed by the program. It's just for you to get a sense of what you want to do. And then what we wanted to do is to, in this case, change game object color to red. Okay, so this is our if statement. And then if this condition is not met, then do something else. So here we can have an else condition, and when we have an else condition, pretty much we're not telling it what the condition is that needs to be met. So if it doesn't go through what we set up for if, then do something. So here we only need curly brackets. So in else we could say object is blue. So if it's not pressed, our object is going to be blue. If we press the key, then it would be red. So knowing this, we can start to look for maybe ways that we can put this together. So you might ask yourself, how would I know about specific commands that we will be using? So for that, let's go to unity3d.com. And this is pretty much the repository of anything Unity, whether it's downloading the latest update, looking for tutorials, looking for events, or looking for specific syntax that you're going to be using. So under Learn, not only will come across tutorials and different communities, but also there's a whole section dedicated to documentation. So these could be documentation processes, but also the scripting API up here. So let's click on scripting API, and under scripting API, we want to go to Unity Engine. So this would allow us to interact with all the kind of existing classes in Unity Engine and different functionalities that we can extract. So you want to scroll down and go to this part called classes. This would allow us to access different class functionalities. And if you scroll down to where it says input, here, we'll see that under input, we have a documentation of how to use different type of either mouse or keyboard inputs. If you scroll down, we have an example of how that could be used in an if statement. We have static properties, but we want to look at static methods. So under static methods, we have a function called getKey. So it says returns true while the user holds down key identified by name, and this is what we want to be using for this if statement. If you click on getKey, we should come across an example of how to use the getKey syntax here. So it says inside an if statement, we can provide an input and getKey, and we could use different types of keys. If you scroll down, for instance, here we have an example of how to use the up arrow, down arrow, or we can use right or left arrow. If you click on this highlight here where it says key code, and we would see that actually that would allow us to specify a very specific key that we could be using. So in this case, it could be space, or it could be in our syntax if we want to use R for red, B for blue, anything that we want. So we're going to use pretty much this part of the syntax here. You can either copy paste, or we can just type ourselves. So under void update, now let's create an if statement. Again, always open close parentheses, open close curly brackets. Now inside parentheses, we want to follow the same syntax. We're going to say that we're going to provide an input, and we're going to do dot. After that, we're going to say getKey. So you can see that the suggestions are very, very helpful in this case, that we want to provide the specific key that we're going to be using. In this case, the syntax was key code, and you can see there's an example of, let's say, keycode.a. And in our case, for instance, we could use R for red. Again, you could use any key in this case. Great. So our if statement is set up here. If I press this key, do something. Now, we want to be able to test what we've created. We want to make sure that we're able to control something with the key. So we could definitely use a debug function here, .log, and then open close parentheses and a semicolon. And here we can print something. For instance, our key working. Great, so save this. And let's go to our Unity environment, go to our console. I'm going to clear console here, and let's press pray, and let's press the key R. So you can see that now it's telling you that our key working. So we're constantly seeing this being printed, and that is because our function is created in void update, therefore it's constantly updating it. So let's stop the play, go back to our syntax here, and we could replace this with another function that would allow us to, for instance, change color of the capsule here. So I'm going to comment this out, and we're going to look for now a method that would allow us to change the color. Let's go back to our Unity and let's take a look at properties of, let's say, our capsule game object. So if you look at capsule game object inside inspector, you'll see that we have something called a renderer, which pretty much determines its visual attributes. So for instance, under here, we can set up a material, we can set up lighting. So we're going to look for the renderer class inside our references. If we go to our browser, we want to look for the renderer class here. While I'm accessing this, I noticed that there's actually a better, more updated version of these references. So I'm going to just click on that, and it pretty much will give me the same information, but perhaps with some updates. Again, taking us to the scripting API. So going back to Unity Engine, scroll down to our classes, expand classes, and scroll down until you find a class called renderer. And it should be here. So if we click on that, we should get an idea of how to use properties of the class called renderer. Now we could see that this is a class in Unity Engine. Here, this could be used to modify meshes, particles, lines, etc. If you scroll down, we're going to have an option here called material. It says returns the first instantiated material assigned to the renderer. Click on here, and inside here we should see examples of how to use this renderer class. Now we're going to talk about materiality and the difference between material and color and other components that make up materiality in later tutorials. But just to give you a general idea, a material is a larger umbrella. Then under there we have the default diffuse color. You can have transparency, you can have texture, etc. So in our case, we want to use the diffuse, we want to change the diffuse color of the object. But let's take a look at this line. It says get component, then angle bracket renderer, so an access to the render class. Then inside there, this is where you could take input. Dot is always to access functionality, material. Then if you scroll down a little bit more, you're going to see that in this example, when you are calling a material, inside that material you can also call the color, so the diffuse color. And in this case, here's an example very similar to what we want to be doing. In this case, just using a mouse, and then they're saying that that specific color, make that white. In our case, it can be make that red. So we're going to take pretty much these two lines and combine them together. We're going to say get component renderer dot material. After that, we're going to say then dot color, and then we're going to specify what that specific color is. Let's go to our mono develop and let's start writing our code here. Now we're going to say get component, so you can see that it appears, get component, and then angle bracket renderer. There you go. There's the class. You want to close your bracket, but then open close parentheses. We want to access the functionality, and then we're going to say from that functionality we want to access material. From material we want to access color. And in this case, the specific color that we want to be using is going to be color dot, let's say, red. So we should start to see, for instance, if I'm typing yellow or if I'm typing blue, this should be kind of default values that are already assigned to RGB or HSVA. So in this case, let's say red. And what we want to do at the end, we want to close this command. Great, let's save the code and go back to Unity and see if our key press works. Go to our game scene and press R, and you're going to see that the color changed to red. Great, so this part is working, but if you let go of the key, you're going to see that the color remains red. So this might be fine for a specific, let's say, functionality that you want to set up, but there's no way for this code to know any other state. Right now, it begins with the initial color, which is white, but once we change it to red, then it doesn't know how to go back to the initial color. So let's come out of our game scene, go back to our code, and we need to just fix this code using an else statement. I could, in this case, delete any extra lines, and then go to new line and write a new else statement, and then open, close curly brackets. And pretty much what we want to set up in our else statement, because in this case, I wanted to just, when I let the key go, it goes back to original color or maybe another color. So all you need to do is to just repeat this line. So you can select and copy it and paste right here. And let's set up another color here, let's say blue. And that should be something that comes up in the suggestion. So now save the code, go back, play again. So we'll see that actually the else statement right now is something that's displayed from the very beginning because it's in void update and it's constantly being calculated. Now if you press R, it goes red, but if you let go, it goes back to blue. This is exactly what we wanted. But we can also set up else if statements in between. So maybe we assign another key to another color. So come out of our game view, go back here, and we can repeat the same structure of our if statement, but we can assign another key to else if. You could copy your whole if statement and paste it under your first one and just add another component to this, else if, and then just change your input variables. So in this case, maybe I want to change this to Y for yellow, and I'm gonna change the input color to yellow. Let's save, go back to our game space, play this, R for red, Y for yellow. So as you can imagine, we can keep adding more conditions here. Our last step here would be adding another game object here. I'm going to come out of the game view and go to our game object, go through 3D object, and let's add a cube this time. And let's move the cube over so we can actually see that separate the two. So I'm going to press W and begin moving the cube. So I should be able to see these two if I look at my camera here. And what I need to do now is to also attach the script to this cube object. So I'll go to project and grab my script and also drag it over the cube objects. You always want to select and double check. Now if I play this again, we should be able to control both of these using the same keys. So you can assign the same script to a number of objects. Thank you for watching this tutorial. In the next tutorial, we will build upon what we accomplished here and add a three-dimensional vector to our script in order for us to be able to move our game object using multiple keys.